Hello, hi, and welcome to another episode of The Emma Gunn Show and a midweek instalment of Bullet Points. This is the episode which you can find on audio on the podcast platforms that you're probably very used to navigating, but it is also the podcast that I upload as video on my Substack and also over on YouTube, which is rather thrilling and exciting. Anyway, in this episode of Bullet Points, I wanted to talk about something that actually came up in conversation with my brother at the weekend. We were talking about a wide variety of things, to be completely honest, and then we sort of stumbled across this idea of emotional vampires. This is not a new concept. This is not something that I am finding out about for the first time, but it was the context within which we were talking about it that I thought was really interesting. So the first time I ever heard really about emotional vampires was when I became quite interested in this idea of the narcissist-empath dynamic. This idea that a narcissist will latch onto an empath, or that an empath will be drawn into the lure of a narcissist, and a hideously codependent and ultimately destructive relationship, whether it be romantic, emotional, professional, a friendship, whatever will ensue. Anyway, so I heard about this idea of emotional vampires, and I have definitely in the past heard of people described as being emotional vampires, and just this idea that they take a lot from people, that they get into these dynamics, or they are the person that you know at school, they are the colleague at work who just takes so much more of everybody else's time, effort, energy, and also mental and emotional real estate. And this is what we were talking about. My brother and I were talking broadly about politics and what was going on in the world and this, that, and the other. And he said something about Donald Trump and how one of the worst things that he finds is how much time and attention he takes up, how obsessed almost people are. He is sort of a quintessential on a global platform emotional vampire, because people are engaging with him to the point of obsession. There are YouTube channels and podcasts that dissect every single move critically, because they just do not like the fact that this man occupies the highest seat of power in the world, for all of the reasons that I think are probably relatively evident. So I was just wondering, do you ever notice that there are those people who just seem to take up far more space in our heads than they should? And the thing about these emotional vampires is it's not that we've granted them that space. It's not that we've said, I'm going to think about that person. It comes on slowly, it creeps up, and before you know it, that person or that thing, no, it is a person, let's face it, emotional vampires is a thing, has just dominated, and you are almost, or they are almost like a soap opera, and you can't miss an episode, you cannot miss a beat, you cannot miss a moment, because that, I don't know, because you just don't want to. You just don't want to miss something, because there's something so vampiric, there's something so alluring about what they are up to and what they are doing. Another person in the public eye who I think is a really good example of this, somebody who people are so emotionally invested in either one way or the other, is Meghan Markle. I would say that when it comes to sort of global media, she is also somebody who takes up a lot of people's time and attention. People are either appalled at and by her, or people are enthralled by her. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of middle ground. I think even if you ask the person who doesn't really think about Meghan Markle, they will probably sit in either a love or a hate category. Like, I don't really think about her, but yeah, she seems like an idiot, or I don't really think about her, but she seems really nice. It's that sort of thing. Like, it's not sort of benign, it's not apathetic. There are feelings, and I think that this is a really fascinating thing to just unpick in this episode. So if we're talking about emotional vampires, I think it's important to talk about how you can maybe spot them, how you could maybe see them in the wild, because I've used very high profile examples because I think that they probably tell the story without having to use very many words or descriptions. But emotional vampires, if you like, are those people who feed on attention, who feed on controversy, who feed on almost, they require a strong emotional response to whatever it is that they do. They do not want to glide through life unnoticed. They want to always be noticed. And even if it's bad, that's good, which I personally can't really get my head around, but there we go. Now, obviously, this whole idea of emotional vampires does stem from psychology. As I said, I talked about it before. When I first started really reading up on narcissists and empaths, I became aware of this concept of emotional vampires, and I think you can sort of see it. And these are people who thrive on other people's emotional energy, and probably get quite frustrated by people who don't seem to have any interest in them whatsoever, to the point where they will stir up or try to stir up that emotional energy within them. They are often really polarizing, and I can think about this doesn't even have to be about big global figures. This can be about at school, at college, at work. I can think about people who, not bad people necessarily, but just people who require people to have a strong feeling about them. And that in itself can be quite draining. And they can often be quite good storytellers. And again, Donald Trump's probably a really good example here. Maybe not the most linear of storytellers, but just sort of like they can weave a narrative. They can create a backstory that, again, is quite enthralling, quite interesting. And again, sort of started talking to my brother about sort of these high profile figures who seem to polarize opinion. But I was even thinking about it in the sense of I've seen people who I think are very grounded, very strong, really know who they are, get rattled by people that you would describe as emotional vampires. I was talking to a friend the other day, and it was only when I was chatting to my brother over the weekend, I thought, I feel like this relates somehow. Even if you kind of really know yourself, you're really steady, you're really strong, and you're quite a straight shooter in how you deal with things. Sometimes these emotional vampires aren't straight shooters. Sometimes they constantly have you guessing, but within that, you're constantly trying to please them. So you're constantly trying to keep them on side because you don't want to be a victim of one of their outbursts, or when they maybe do lash out, because they can be quite harsh. So for the sake of painting a picture, let's take Donald Trump and let's take Meghan Markle. So Donald Trump, it seems, enjoys polarizing people. He likes to dominate the news cycle. Even sometimes when it doesn't seem to be worthy of the news cycle, he wants to be in it. He wants to be the thing that is steering everything. In the same way, he knows, and I think there's a really strong parallel with social media here, and I think he really understands this. There is a massive parallel with causing outrage and attention. The more outrage you cause, the more attention you get. Another great example of this is Bonnie Blue. She's caused a huge amount of outrage, and she has never had so much attention. And in Donald Trump's case, attention, having that much attention equals power, equals the presidency. Meghan Markle, slightly differently, is, I think, somebody that people latch onto. They project a lot onto her, whether it's about race, about where she came from, about royalty and how they think royalty should be treated, perceived, and observed. All of those sorts of things. I think she actually has quite a breadth of sort of topics that she's touched that people feel quite passionately about, and I think she's been able to. Well, not she's been able to, but she seems to be either a saint or a villain in people's minds. And again, it's that polarization. On either side, people are outraged, either outraged at how poorly she's treated or outraged at how she hasn't been made to go away yet. But it's a very, very strong, very, very strong feeling. And I think that this is also true for people that all of us, me included, know in our real lives. We can think of people, I don't even need to give you much more of a prompt. I'm sure you can think of people who you just find draining, who you're like, why do they bother me? I don't know why they bother me. And it's not because sometimes I do think like, if you have a problem with someone, that's a you problem, not a them problem. But I think these emotional vampires are slightly different. I think they actually want to create the problem within you about them that makes you focus on them. I think there's an element of manipulation here that isn't. I've talked before in this podcast about, I was chatting to my friend Terry saying, this person is really bothered by me. Like I noticed a little while ago, we definitely have different opinions about stuff, but I noticed on someone else's social media feed, I was like, oh, that person's definitely blocked me. But the fact that we have differing opinions about things about this one particular subject doesn't seem worthy of a block. And then I was chatting to my friend Terry, who said, but you bother her. So she needs you out of her eye line. It's not necessarily a you thing, that's a her thing. I think emotional vampires are slightly different. I think emotional vampires want to be in your eye line, want to bother you, but also want to make it impossible for you to block them. And I think that's where they are actually quite genius. So I think as well as being able to identify them, and I don't actually think we need a huge amount of prompting to do that, it's important to ask why we get hooked on them. Why is it that we get so fascinated? And again, there's a massive parallel here with social media. If these are people who court controversy, if these are people who have big opinions, who stand for something, who are loud, who are proud, who kind of make you take sides, or you're with them and they're saying one thing and you can feel as you're talking to them that you're already changing your point of view in order to sort of align more with them because you want an easier life, then you know that you're dealing with an emotional vampire. You know that you're dealing with somebody who is taking you off balance, which can be really really unsettling. But the brain really likes storytelling. The brain really likes big characters, and we see it on social media all the time. And I've said this so many times before. I've even said this about podcast guests. There are some absolutely amazing podcast guests that aren't famous, don't have a massive social media following, but what they've had to say, when I've had conversations with them, I have found them infinitely more valuable than the person who's come on the show with 1 million followers, or let's say 150,000 followers, and I don't know, a newsletter that boasts however many tens of thousands of subscribers, all of that kind of stuff. When I actually sit in front of them, it's formulaic and actually ultimately empty. Yet they make a lot of noise, they stand for something, they're repetitive, and so they get into people's heads. And I suppose that's another kind of emotional vampirism, if you like, because it's used to leverage a business, which is a completely different thing altogether. But all of these, if you think about it, all of the controversies, all of the bold statements, all of the standing for something, all of the establishing themselves, particularly people who establish themselves as, well, I'm the only one who can do this, or I'm the only one who did this. All of those are little hooks that you don't realize are getting caught on you and you can't extricate yourself. So maybe we should think about how we can extricate ourselves from emotional vampires. Okay, so how do you free yourself from this? Well, first of all, you ask yourself, if you're thinking about somebody a lot, think, how did they get into my mind? How did they get into my head? Recognize when somebody is living in your head rent-free, and then begin to take action. Now that could be a gentle mute, doesn't have to be a block. It could be a mute, it could be a polite hello at a social gathering rather than getting into a big conversation. It could be a very benign, oh, how was your weekend at the water cooler or in the kitchenette at work. It doesn't have to be anything big, but be very clear to limit your time with that person. You might actually find they get rattled by it in the beginning, but be consistent and just limit your exposure to that person. On social media, admittedly, it's much easier, but try it in real life too. Try to implement a mute in real life that you can implement on social media. And if this person is a colleague, obviously you have to maintain professionalism and be appropriate in the workplace, but just limit and be polite. Be polite, and also make all of your communication non-sticky, as I like to say, which means so they can't stick onto anything. Make it absolutely just clear, precise. They can't get their hooks into anything, so that you can begin to think about them less. The other thing you can do, obviously, is fill your life with the people that don't put that drain on you, the people who actually make you feel warm and fuzzy as opposed to make you feel insecure and frazzled, which can be the case with these emotional vampires. But the thing about these people is the people who actually are warm and fuzzy and who make you feel good are often the people who demand the least from you, and they are the ones that you can actually find that you not ignore, but you don't prioritize, because emotional vampires are able to make you prioritize them. So let's move away from that. So circling right back to the beginning of all of this, some people are emotional magnets and some people are emotional drains. I've gone with emotional vampire because I think in the context of the way that this conversation started and talking about someone who's so high profile and so globally talked about as Donald Trump, I thought it was quite appropriate. But the fact of the matter is you do get to choose who lives in your mental space, who gets access to your emotional space. And so the key, I think, forget about the people in the media because that's easier to control. But the key to emotional vampires, I think, in our real life is to figure out a way of minimizing, moving away slowly, like backing away from these people and allowing them less and less time in your physical space, your emotional space, and your mental space. But the key, as I said, is identifying them. Is once you see, oh my God, that person takes up so much of my time because actually they want to, even though they're not doing anything. It's like my brain is an investment portfolio that they set up ages ago. They're off having a lovely life, and yet I'm the one who's ticking over. The interest is building, literally, in this person. They somehow are able to sow a seed. So do some mental, emotional, physical gardening, weeding, get their roots out of there and think, they don't mean anything. They are not important. I should like to move on. And I do not want to let this person occupy my thoughts, because not 9 times out of 10, but 10 times out of 10, they aren't worth your time, effort, energy, all of those things. So how about we talk about this in Substack, or you email me, office@emmaguns.com, or you DM me on Instagram where I am at Emma Guns. I think I got those all right. Whew, for once. Like I said, you can watch this on YouTube, on Substack, and you can also listen to this wherever it is that you find your podcast. But who else has felt the pull, the drain of an emotional vampire? Was it professional? Was it personal? Was it romantic? Have you been able to sever ties, cut them out, not let them bother you anymore while still being very much present, because you have to be a colleague, for example? Let me know. I really want to know, because when I started talking to other people about this, it became really obvious that lots of us have these people, and by their design, by the way, who just take up more thoughts than they should. And so if you've managed to get somebody out of your thoughts, out of your heart, or out of your feelings, please do let me know. office@emmaguns.com, DM me on Instagram, I'm at Emma Guns, or join the chat. I'll start a chat about emotional vampires on Substack, but please, it would be lovely to see you there. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Bullet Points. I will see you on the next one.